The John Textor rumours are continuing for Derby County, with Alan Nixon being the latest to report this to Derby County. Now, obviously, there's a lot of discussions that are ongoing in regards to Textor. He's obviously got his sights on Sheffield Wednesday, who are currently in administration, but obviously Derby County are in a great position to also be taken over. Now, we're going to cover it all in this video. We're going to take a deeper look into Textor as well, and sort of what he could do for Derby County. Now, we did obviously make a video a couple of days ago discussing this, but let's take a deeper look. John Textor is 60 years old and he's from the US, and he founded Eagle Football's holding, in which they have majority ownership of Botafogo, Olympique Lyonnais, as well as RWDM Brussels, which is obviously a huge set of clubs to have ownership of. Now, he was recently involved in Crystal Palace, but obviously we know the situation that happened there. Will Textor be able to take Derby County forward? He certainly has the funds to be able to do so, but the big problem here is whether he is able to sort of get an ownership share from David Clowes. Now, obviously, the big discussion in regards to Textor is whether he is actually a good owner, whether he is actually a good investor of a football club. Now, in my opinion, you look at what Palace have done and things like that, and I think you can only say good things. You obviously look at the situation at Lyon, and that's probably a little bit worse off, obviously, with having their financial troubles. But for me, we've got to be open and honest about what Derby County need right now, and that is huge financial backing. If Derby County want to be a club battling for promotion and battling the top end of the Championship, that will need a lot of money. Now, we've already seen David Clowes this summer spend around £15 million on the signings of Patrick Agyemang, Lewis Travis, bringing in Max Johnston as well. And that's not including wages or anything else that have been brought into Derby County. So I think we've got to be really sort of honest with ourselves and what we need to expect from an owner. Now, obviously, there is doubts in regards to John Textor because of the situation that happened in regards to Lyon, and obviously the Crystal Palace European drama that sort of meant that they fell into the Europa Conference League. But ultimately, you can't really complain about what he's done at any of the clubs, because he did everything possible to help keep Lyon in the top division in France, which I think he was successful in doing. He did everything possible for Crystal Palace to be able to get into that situation, apart from obviously it being put into blind shares, but he was trying to sell his stake in the club anyway. So it's one of those situations where I think he was very unlucky with the negative press he's been getting over the course of recent years. Now, if we want to talk about whether John Textor has the money or not, he is considered a billionaire. He has a reported net worth of around $3.5 billion US, and that ultimately means that he certainly has enough money for Derby County. Now, David Clowes has what? You take off the $3 billion, about $400-500 million in terms of net worth, which is obviously great for David Clowes. It's brilliant. But ultimately, it's not enough to run a football club long term, in my personal opinion. Now, if Derby County were to get to the Premier League and get the Premier League money, obviously it then opens a whole world of conversation for David Clowes, because the money that you'd be getting year on year is absolutely ridiculous, so long as obviously you stay in the division. But ultimately, to stay in the Premier League, you've got to spend money. And that is where you sort of need someone like John Textor, who could give you that money to be able to sort of invest in the squad, invest in the facilities, invest in the academy, invest in the B team. Because as much as Derby County have integrated a B team, the B team is essentially just Derby County's under-21s, their best under-21s, and our injured first team players. So we've sort of got the same cohort of players playing for the B team and the 21s over the course of the season to get fitness for first team players. It's not necessarily anything in terms of actually developing those players. Whereas if you had a proper budget for the B team, you could have a proper squad which actually helps develop those younger talents, rather than sort of being there as and when, if that makes sense. But obviously we're going to have to wait and see sort of how that develops. Now, could Textor buy Derby County? Yes, he could. I think if we go back to administration, David Clowes spent about £70 million in order to get Derby County out of administration. I think that includes the stadium sale as well, which obviously he bought. Now, if The case is still the same as it was in September of 2024. David Clouds was willing to sell up to an 80% stake. I think that would be available for around £60 million, a 80% stake, something along those lines. But obviously the situation in regards to having that stake is that David Clouds does want to retain chairman status, at least in an honorary capacity. He still wants to have his hand in what's going on so that the situation that we've just been in doesn't occur again, which I am completely fine with. I completely agree with it. I just don't know how much other owners who are putting their money in would feel about that, if that makes sense. Obviously, we've had situations like this before where there's lots of different hands at the table trying to make something work when we've had ownership groups, and I just don't necessarily think it works. Now, don't get me wrong. I think there needs to be a board of directors who sort of, you've got the footballing side, you've got the business side, you've got the media marketing side, all that sort of thing. I think you need people like that in those places. But ultimately, you should just have one person that makes decisions, or it should always be an odd number. It should be 1 or 3 or 5 so that it can be voted on and you go in that direction sort of thing. Now, if Textor does buy in and he buys more than a 49% stake, he will become either even owner or majority shareholder, which will mean that he's got full control and decision-making capacity, which I always think is sort of the right way to go. You want a guy who... guy or girl, doesn't really matter, who is going to make those final decisions, and that's something that could come from Textor with his wealth. He's got a lot of wealth. Now, it has been reported over recent weeks, as I discussed in the previous video, that he has put a £400 million offer on the table for Wolverhampton Wanderers. However, that is expected to be turned down and ignored. Obviously, he does have an interest in Sheffield Wednesday. However, with Sheffield Wednesday being in administration, that's going to be more of a long and drawn out process, and probably more of a difficult process to actually get through the door and actually get a deal done. And that's sort of what opens the door here to Textor potentially coming in at Derby County, because it's probably a really easy sale. From what I'm aware, there's no debts at Derby County. We're in a very, very good position in terms of our finances. You look at the players coming through the academy, there's some really good ones. You look at Cruz Allen, now McAndrew, Jack Thompson, someone like Harry Hawkins, so I'm not going to turn around and say he's going to play in the EFL, but there's a lot of quality in that academy system. We've just lost an academy goalkeeper to Manchester United, and with having money behind us, it would probably help us keep on to those players, but obviously that is a discussion for another day. Now, if you have not done so already, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on that notification bell. But if you have not done so already, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on that notification bell. I look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments.